I'm afraid your husband's estate is entirely encumbered. There is nothing left but these considerable debts.
Full respect, full respect, full respect.
She had told herself one thing, just one, when she signed the papers. Do not feel anything. It was practical advice, the kind a woman gives herself when she has already felt too much and lost too much and cannot afford the cost of feeling again. Clara Reed had been practicing not feeling for 2 years, ever since the morning she stood in a lawyer's office in Galveston and learned that her late husband had left her not a home, not savings, not even the small silver brooch she had always assumed was hers, but a stack of debts so tall they blocked out the light. She had sold what she could, moved into a boarding house, taken in mending work until her fingers were raw, and when a woman at her church had pressed a folded newspaper clipping into her hand and said, quietly, like she was offering something almost too tender to say out loud, "There is nothing shameful about starting over, Clara." She had taken the clipping home and read it by candlelight and told herself it was just a solution. A rancher in Calla Springs, Montana needed a wife. Not a romantic one. The advertisement was almost startlingly honest about that. A business arrangement. A woman to run the household, care for 2 children, and present a stable family to the bank that was reconsidering the ranch's loan. In return, a home, a wage, and full respect. Full respect. She had read those 2 words 3 times. She had written back the next morning. His name was Daniel Voss. His letter in response had been exactly 4 sentences long. Practical, polite, utterly without warmth. She had appreciated that more than she could say. Warmth had a way of making promises it couldn't keep. She had learned that the hard way. Practical was something she could trust. She told herself it was just an arrangement. She told herself that all the way to Montana. If you love slow, emotional Western romance stories with quiet love and real heart, please subscribe now. New stories come every single week, and this one is only just beginning. The town of Calla Springs appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then as a cluster of wooden buildings along a main road that the afternoon sun hit sideways and turned briefly gold. Clara watched it from the stage window with her hands folded in her lap and her one good traveling bag pressed against her feet, and she breathed slowly and reminded herself of the rule. Do not feel anything. Daniel Voss was waiting at the stage stop. She recognized him immediately, not from any description, because his letter had contained none, but from the particular way he stood. Straight, but not stiff. Still, but not rigid. A man who had learned to be steady because steadiness was what was needed, and he had needed it for a long time. He was younger than she had expected. Mid-30s, perhaps, with dark hair and a jaw that needed a shave, and eyes that were a particular shade of quiet gray that she did not let herself look at too long. He shook her hand. "Mrs. Reed." "Mr. Voss," she said. He took her bag without being asked. She followed him to the wagon and climbed up, and they left Calla Springs behind them, and the arrangement, such as it was, began. She met the children that evening. The older one was a girl named Ada, 8 years old, with her father's gray eyes and a serious mouth, and the particular watchfulness of a child who had learned to read rooms before entering them. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed loosely and looked at Clara with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was not yet open either. The younger one was a boy named George, 5 years old, round-faced and solemn, who appeared from behind Ada's shoulder, studied Clara for approximately 4 seconds, and then said, "Do you know how to make apple cake?" "I do," Clara said. "Our last housekeeper didn't," he said gravely. "That was a problem." Ada put her hand on her brother's shoulder in that practiced older sibling way. "George." "It was," he insisted. Clara looked at these 2 children and felt something move in her chest that she did not have permission to feel. She took a breath and pressed it back down. "I will make apple cake on Saturday," she said, "if that suits." George looked at his sister. Ada looked at Clara. "Saturday suits," Ada said carefully. The agreement, Clara told herself, was off to a reasonable start. The house was large and genuinely in need of care. Not neglect exactly. More the accumulated disarray of a man doing everything at once for too long. She spent the first week learning its rhythms, which windows let in drafts, which floorboards spoke at night, where Daniel kept the accounts and where the children kept their boots and why the bread always rose better near the east wall. Daniel was rarely inside during the day. He came in for meals and sat at the head of the table and spoke to the children with a quiet attentiveness that she noticed even when she was trying not to. He asked Ada about the book she was reading. He listened to George's detailed account of a very specific beetle he had found near the creek with the kind of focused patience that some fathers never manage and others have to work very hard to learn. He did not talk much to Clara, not because he was cold, more because he seemed to understand, in that unspoken way some people do, that she had not come there to be talked at. He passed her the butter. He said thank you for each meal with a sincerity that never felt automatic. He left firewood stacked by the kitchen door without being asked. She noticed all of it. She told herself she was simply noting the practical qualities of a practical man. It was Ada who complicated things first. On a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks in, Clara was in the small parlor mending a curtain when Ada came and sat in the chair across from her without invitation or explanation and opened her book and read in silence. Clara continued her mending. Neither of them spoke. But when Clara finished and rose to put the curtain back, Ada looked up and said, "You're not like I thought you'd be." Clara paused. "What did you think I'd be?" Ada considered this with the precision she brought to most things. "Temporary," she said. "The last two were temporary. They came and then they went, and George cried both times, though he won't say so." Clara sat back down. "I see," she said quietly. "I'm not saying that to be rude," Ada said. "I'm saying it because George is going to get attached, and I'd rather know now if you're planning to leave." Clara looked at this 8-year-old girl who had clearly appointed herself the emotional guardian of her household and felt something deep and recognizable stir inside her. She had been that girl once, after her own mother got sick. The one who watched the door and counted the risks and decided that prevention was kinder than cure. "I'm not planning to leave," Clara said honestly. "I can't make you a promise about the future because I've learned that future promises are the hardest kind to keep. But I'm not here temporarily." Ada studied her. "Why did you come?" "Because I needed a home," Clara said. "Same as most people, when it comes down to it." Ada was quiet for a moment. "Our mother died 2 years ago," she said. "Papa doesn't talk about it. But sometimes I hear him in the barn at night talking to the horses, and I think that's probably when he does his crying." Clara did not trust herself to speak for a moment. "Your father sounds like a good man," she said finally. "He is," Ada said with simple certainty. "He just doesn't know what to do with all the parts that still hurt." She went back to her book. Clara went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a long time, looking out the window at the cold Montana sky, pressing her palms flat against the wood, reminding herself of the rule. But the rule was getting harder. The bank visit happened on a Friday. Daniel had warned her it would be a formality. The loan officer, a man named Griggs, had made noise about the ranch's finances and had suggested, with the particular indirectness of a man who enjoys having power over people, that a stable family situation would reflect well on the account. So Clara dressed carefully and rode into Calla Springs beside Daniel in the wagon, and they sat across from Griggs in his oak-paneled office and answered his questions about household management and the children's schooling and their plans for the coming spring. Griggs was the kind of man who looked at a woman and saw a function rather than a person. Clara had met many of them. She answered his questions calmly and precisely and did not let him see that his manner irritated her. On the way home, Daniel said, "You handled that well." "He was manageable," she said. "He's not a kind man," Daniel said. "I appreciate that you didn't let him rattle you." She looked at the road ahead of them. "I've met worse." A pause, then, "I believe that." It was not a large thing. 2 short sentences, but there was something in the way he said it. Not with pity, not with curiosity about the details, but with a simple acknowledgement that she had lived through hard things and come out capable on the other side. She had not been looked at that way in a long time. She felt something shift very slightly in her chest. She pushed it back down, but it was getting slower to go. George got sick in November. It came on fast, the way childhood fevers do, One evening he was fine, and by midnight he was burning and restless and calling out in his sleep. Clara was up with him before she was fully awake, moving on some instinct that didn't need to consult her head. Cold cloth on his forehead. Broth from the pot she had kept warm. Sitting beside his small bed in the lamplight, talking to him in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular, just so there was a human sound in the room. Daniel appeared in the doorway at some point in the night. She didn't know exactly when. She looked up and he was there, still dressed, like he hadn't slept either, and he looked at George and then at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. He came and sat on the other side of the bed. They stayed like that through the worst of it, the two of them on either side of the boy, passing the cloth back and forth, taking turns with the broth, and somewhere around 3 in the morning George's fever broke, and he sighed in his sleep, and his small face went slack and peaceful. Clara let out a breath that felt like it had been held for hours. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "Thank you," he said. "He's going to be fine," she said. "I know." He lowered his hands. "I meant for being here, for not waiting to be asked." She looked at George's sleeping face. "You shouldn't have to ask," she said. "Not for something like this." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The arrangement we made, I know it's not what either of us would have chosen in an easier life." "No," she agreed. "But I want you to know," he said, slowly, like a man who has thought carefully about his words and is still not sure he has the right ones, "that I don't think of it as an arrangement anymore. I haven't for a while." The lamp on the bedside table flickered slightly in a draft from under the window. "Daniel," she said carefully, "we should be careful." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it to complicate things." "It does complicate things." "Yes," he said. "It does." They looked at each other across the sleeping child, and Clara felt the rule she had been keeping so carefully begin to loosen at the edges, like something left too long in warm water. She was not ready. She was also, she realized with a kind of exhausted honesty, no longer entirely able to pretend she didn't feel what she felt. It was Ada who saw it first. Of course it was Ada. One morning at breakfast, when Daniel had gone out and George was still pulling on his boots, Ada looked up from her oatmeal and said to Clara, very matter-of-factly, "You like him." Clara kept stirring the pot. "He's a good man." "That's not what I said," Ada said. Clara set down the spoon. She looked at this child with her gray eyes and her careful mind and her exhausting habit of seeing things clearly. "Ada," she said. "I'm not upset," Ada said quickly. "I just want you to know that George and I already talked about it, and we think it would be all right." Clara stared at her. "You and George talked about it." "George brought it up, actually," Ada said. "He said you smell like his mother used to smell, like something warm, and that he thought Papa looked less sad since you came. Then I said I had noticed that too. Then George said we should tell you it was all right." She paused. "So I'm telling you, it's all right." Clara sat down at the table. "Ada," she said after a moment, "I came here because I needed a practical solution to a difficult situation. I did not come here to fall in love with your family." Ada tilted her head slightly. "And yet," she said. Clara looked at her. Ada almost smiled. It was the first time Clara had seen her come close. "That's what Papa said about Montana," she said. "He said he only came here because it was practical. That's the word he uses. And yet here we all are." George appeared in the doorway with one boot on. "Is the cake Saturday?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said faintly. "The cake is Saturday." The trouble came from Griggs, not because the loan was recalled, but because he had found, or claimed to have found, an irregularity in the property boundary survey from 12 years ago, a discrepancy that meant a portion of the east pasture might be legitimately disputed by the neighboring property holder, a man named Aldous, who had been trying to acquire Voss land for years. Daniel came home from town with the notice in his hand, and the particular tightness around his eyes that Clara had learned meant he was working very hard to stay calm. She read the notice at the kitchen table. "This is Griggs doing Aldous a favor," she said. "Probably," Daniel said. "But if the survey holds, I lose the east pasture and the creek access with it. Without the creek access, the cattle operation doesn't make sense. Without the cattle operation, the loan becomes a problem." Clara set the paper down. "Do you have the original survey?" "Somewhere." "Find it," she said. "And every piece of correspondence you have with the county land office going back as far as you have. Every receipt, every record." He looked at her. "Clara, I know what a fraudulent dispute looks like," she said. "My late husband's creditors were very creative men. I learned a great deal about what records matter and what records can be challenged." She met his eyes. "Let me help you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm choosing to. That's different." They worked 3 evenings together at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. Clara and Daniel side by side over papers and record books, their heads close together in the lamplight. She showed him what to look for. He found 2 documents she hadn't expected: a letter from the original county surveyor confirming the boundary line, and a signed acknowledgement from Aldis's own father that predated the current dispute by 20 years. "This is enough," she said, pressing her finger to the page. "This closes it." Daniel looked at the documents and then at her, and she saw in his face the same thing she had seen the night of George's fever, that unguarded look, the one he didn't manage to put away quickly enough. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I know we said it was an arrangement," he said. "I know you came here needing something solid and safe and uncomplicated." He paused. "I know that what I'm about to say is not uncomplicated." "Say it anyway," she said, and her voice was quiet and steady. "I don't want to be an arrangement to you," he said. "I want to be a choice. I want you to stay here because you want this, not because it's practical." He looked down at the papers and then back at her. "I know that might not be what you came here for." Clara looked at this man, at his careful hands on the table, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting into Montana wind and Montana worry, at the way he had sat beside his son's sickbed all night without being asked, at the way he listened to a little girl talk about beetles, at the way he said thank you like he meant it, every single time. She thought about the rule she had made on the train. She thought about how it had not survived contact with any of this. "Daniel," she said, "I think I stopped following my own rules sometime around the 3rd week." Something moved in his face, something cautious and hopeful at the same time. "I came here needing something practical," she said, "and I found that. But I also found Ada reading in the parlor because she wanted company she wasn't ready to ask for, and George and his beetles, and a man who stacks firewood before I know I need it and says thank you like he's not taking anything for granted." She stopped. "I did not plan to feel any of this, but here I am, feeling it anyway." He reached across the table and took her hand. Not dramatically, just simply, the way people reach for things they have been careful with for a long time and are finally ready to hold. They married in the spring, when the land around Calla Springs came back green and the creek was running full and the light lasted long into the evening. It was a small ceremony. The pastor and a few neighbors and the 2 children cleaned up and solemn in the front row. George had apple cake at the celebration after. He declared it the best he had ever tasted, which Clara suspected was not entirely objective, but she accepted it graciously. Ada stood beside Clara while the photographs were being taken and slipped her hand into hers, quietly, without ceremony, the way she did most things. Clara held it. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were in bed and the house was quiet in that deep, particular way it got on spring evenings, Daniel and Clara sat on the porch together and looked at the land. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Clara said. "Tell me," he said. "That woman at my church, the one who gave me the advertisement, she said there was nothing shameful about starting over." Clara looked at the dark shapes of the mountains in the distance. "I thought she meant it as comfort. I think now she meant it as a door." Daniel was quiet beside her. "Are you glad you walked through it?" he said. She looked at him. At this man who had not been what she expected, who had given her something she had not known she was looking for, who had turned a practical arrangement into the realest thing she had known in years. "Yes," she said simply. He put his arm around her and she leaned into his side, and they sat together while the stars came out over Montana, one at a time, slow and steady, the way good things come when you have finally stopped bracing against them. She had come for a roof. She had stayed for a home. And somewhere in between the apple cake and the account books and a small boy's fever breaking at 3 in the morning, she had found what she had not let herself hope for. Not a solution, a life. If this story touched something in you tonight, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you the longest. Tell me where in the world you are watching from, because these stories travel to the most beautiful and unexpected places, and it means everything to know who is there listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. There are more stories here, warm and slow and full of the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you aren't looking, and every one of them is made with you in mind. Come back soon. There will always be something here waiting for you.